Nobody likes it when someone speaks ill of their religion, but unfortunately, throughout history and even recently, there have been many famous people who criticize the church, crack jokes, and even blaspheme the name of God. It so happens that these jests did not come cheap, since the sacred is serious business. And that is exactly what we are going to see here today. Few people know, but there is a curious story involving Marilyn Monroe and one of the most famous preachers in the world, Billy Graham. According to reports, in the late 1950s, Billy Graham went to see a performance of Marilyn in Los Angeles. But he was not there just as a spectator. He said that he had felt a spiritual calling to talk to her and tried to share a message about Jesus. According to him, Marilyn listened but responded coldly, saying, "I do not need your Jesus." Less than a week after that encounter, Marilyn Monroe was found dead in her apartment at 36 years old. The official cause was an overdose of illicit substances in an episode that to this day raises doubts and theories. Was it really an accident? For believers, she had rejected salvation and paid the price shortly thereafter. Even if to others it is nothing more than coincidence, the fact is that this story has continued to circulate for decades. And even without concrete proof that the conversation happened the way they say, many see this case as one of those warnings that God does not forgive heretics. Friedrich Nietzsche was one of the most controversial names in modern philosophy. He had sharp ideas and a serious gripe with any kind of religion. Raised in a Christian household, he became an outright critic of Christianity and became known for the famous phrase that to this day many have heard, "God is dead." In the final years of his life, Nietzsche collapsed. In 1889, while living in Turin, Italy, one day he saw a coachman beating a horse in the street. The scene was so distressing that the philosopher ran over, embraced the animal, and began to weep. They say he whispered something into the animal's ear, and after that, he never spoke sense again. From that point on, his mind deteriorated completely. He spent the last 10 years in silence, writing letters signed The Crucified and The Antichrist. He was diagnosed with a severe neurological condition and became totally dependent on his family. Some theories point to excessive substance use, others to an infection contracted in the bars he frequented. In any case, the thinker who mocked faith spent his final days reclusive, unable to speak for himself. The Titanic was one of the largest ships ever built at the beginning of the 20th century. It was gigantic, luxurious, and full of innovations for the time, such as an electrical system, heating, internal telephones, and even a swimming pool. The project was so daring that even before setting sail, there was talk among the engineers and builders that this ship was so well made, so well divided into compartments, that it would be practically impossible for it to sink. It got so exaggerated that the ship's own captain, Edward John Smith, is said to have commented, "Not even God could sink this ship." Days later, the Titanic departed from Southampton, England, bound for New York in April of 1912. Everything seemed perfect until the ship struck an iceberg in the middle of the North Atlantic. In less than 3 hours, the Titanic sank, taking more than 1,500 people with it. And then the phrase came back, "Not even God can sink." Well, it seems that God punished the captain for having uttered that blasphemy, as a lesson not to mock his authority. Although there is no official record that this phrase was really said, the story continued to spread, especially after the ship sank, becoming practically a legend or a myth that serves to keep people fearful of God. During his life, Kazuza never hid that he did not believe in God. On the contrary, he spoke about it mockingly, laughed at religion, called everything nonsense, and said he had no faith at all. He was the kind of person who considered himself too enlightened to believe in anything. He did this for many years, influencing countless people to the same mindset, but the conversation began to change in his final years. In his last months, already weakened, Kazuza began to speak differently. In an interview, he admitted that the illness forced him to stop and reflect. He said he did not know he had faith, but that deep down, it had always been there, that he only realized it when he had nowhere else to turn. It was at that moment that he began to respect those who had religion. The nurse who cared for him, a Christian, said she believes that in the end, Kazuza was saved, having converted. She stated that she fulfilled her mission, which was to preach the gospel. In the end, the one who mocked had to kneel, because at the moment of despair, even those who claim not to believe end up recognizing who is in control. Bon Scott was the original lead singer of AC/DC, and it was with him that the band exploded. During the 70s, he helped record 7 albums and score some of rock's greatest classics. One of them, Highway to Hell, became an anthem among fans but also a reason for controversy. The lyrics spoke of a road to hell, without repentance, without breaks. Many took it as pure provocation, but for Bon, it was just another song about living intensely. And he took it literally. Fame, parties, excesses, it was all part of the package. On February 19, 1980, however, Bon was found unconscious inside a car in London after a night of heavy drinking. The most accepted version is that he had drunk so much that he was suffocated by his own vomit. He was 33 years old. With him that night was a friend named Alistair Kinnear, who said that Bon slept in the passenger seat and there was no way to wake him. He chose to leave him there, thinking it was just another night like so many others, but it was not. Since then, theories have abounded. Some believe that the excess was solely to blame. Others point to something darker, saying that mocking spiritual matters may have exacted its price. Either way, Highway to Hell became one of rock's symbols, and also of Bon's farewell. Shaolin was one of Brazil's most beloved comedians. He had an irreverent style, imitated everyone from politicians to TV hosts, and also satirized famous pastors, which at the time divided opinions. But no one could deny his talent. In January of 2011, he was returning from Campina Grande, Paraíba, Brazil, when a truck made a dangerous maneuver on the shoulder. Shaolin's car was hit and overturned. The comedian suffered severe injuries and fell into a coma. From then on, he was cared for at home with his family's help. For years, he could communicate only through facial expressions and eye movements. Shaolin died in 2016 after a cardiorespiratory arrest at 44 years old. Over time, controversial comments emerged on social media. Some said he suffered all that for having made jokes about religious subjects, people who saw it as a kind of divine punishment. Others find this absurd and defend that humor is part of freedom of expression. Whatever the truth, it is not very wise to mess with religion, especially for the sake of a joke. John Lennon, one of the Beatles' most well-known members, was involved in one of the biggest religious controversies in the music world. During an interview in 1966, he uttered a phrase that angered many, saying that Christianity was on its way out and that the Beatles were more popular than Jesus. In the United States, the reaction was immediate. The band's records were burned in protest, radio stations stopped playing their music, and the Beatles faced a storm of criticism. Years later, Lennon tried to explain, saying that the phrase was misunderstood and that he was only commenting on the band's fame, not mocking anyone's faith. Even so, the phrase stuck, and when he was assassinated on December 8, 1980, at 40 years old, people remembered what he had said in the past. John was hit by 4 bullets on his apartment's doorstep in New York by a fan named Mark Chapman, who later stated that he wanted to become part of Beatles history.
Teenagers have repeated your statements that the Beatles, I like the Beatles more than Jesus Christ. What do you think about that?
Well, originally I was pointed out that fact in reference to England, that we meant more to kids than Jesus did. Or religion.
The case shocked the world, but to this day there are those who say Lennon got what he planted, an idea based on Galatians chapter 6 verse 7. Whatever a man sows, that will he also reap. Whether mere coincidence or true consequence, the discussion continues to this day. Freddie Mercury was one of the greatest names in music history. With his powerful voice and unique stage presence, he helped make Queen one of the most famous bands in the world. But beyond his talent, he also liked to provoke, including when the subject was religion. During an interview, he was asked whether he would rather go to heaven or hell. He answered that he would rather go to hell, because there should be more interesting people there, and that heaven seemed boring. This remark was recorded on video and repeated in various biographies of him. Years later, Queen released an album called Made in Heaven, the last with vocals recorded by Freddie before his death. Many saw this as an irony or even a contrast with what he had said before.
They're real diamonds. It's a present from the devil himself. You don't believe me. They don't believe me.
Another curiosity that feeds this mystical side of the story was a performance where Freddie appeared wearing a diamond glove that, according to him, had been a gift from the devil. Freddie died young, at 45 years old. When the news broke, people could not help but connect the dots, concluding that he suffered some kind of divine punishment for what he said. Pele was always a giant on and off the field, but a phrase he said in 2005 ended up dividing opinions worldwide. During an interview for an Italian news agency, he commented that perhaps he was better known than Jesus Christ. He himself said that the comparison might seem blasphemous, but he argued that it made sense. According to Pele, in regions such as Asia, where Christianity is not dominant, many people might never have heard of Christ but know the name Pele. For him, that was not a matter of vanity but of responsibility. The remark echoed John Lennon's controversial phrase from the 1960s when he said the Beatles were more popular than Jesus, and, like Lennon, Pele also became the target of criticism from religious groups at the time. Years later, in 2022, the king of football passed away at 82 years old after battling colon cancer. He had been hospitalized for about a month in Sao Paulo, Brazil, when the news of his death was confirmed. Many saw this coincidence between the remark and his subsequent death as one more of those cases where destiny seems to charge dearly for words spoken, but others argue that it was just an observation of worldwide fame, with no disrespect intended. Each person always interprets it in the way they understand best. Bruce Lee is remembered to this day as a martial arts legend. He was much more than a fight film actor, becoming a global symbol of discipline, speed, and technique. But in addition to his fame and impressive physique, Bruce also stood out for his irreverence. Contrary to what many imagine, he did not follow any formal religion. Bruce was openly atheist and sought answers in science and Eastern philosophies, such as Buddhism. For him, traditional faith made no sense. The focus was on self-knowledge and balance between mind and body. This direct and rational way of seeing the world for some sounded like a rejection of God, and thus the buzz began. When he died unexpectedly, at 32 years old, many saw it as a kind of punishment or sign, especially among those who believe that denying the divine can have consequences. The death occurred in 1973 in Hong Kong. After an adverse reaction to medication, it was a shock. A young, healthy idol at the height of his career who simply stopped. To this day, there are theories trying to explain what happened. Paulo Gustavo was always known for his over-the-top humor, which mixed exaggeration, critique, and a lot of improvisation. In 2018, during the filming of Minha Vida é Marte, he posted a behind-the-scenes video that ended up causing controversy. In the recording, he makes jokes using names like Jesus Christ and Pablo Vittar, mixing religious references with everyday situations. Some people found it funny, but a good part of the public did not like it at all. The remark went viral and became one of the most talked-about topics on social networks that week. Then, still on the show 220 volts, the character Senhora dos Absurdos ironized the pandemic and spoke mockingly about ventilators, hospitals, and even euthanasia, all with that acidic style that always marked his work. However, this type of humor, which for some is provocative and funny, for others sounds like disrespect. When Paulo died in 2021 from complications of COVID, there were those who said he paid his tongue. Especially on social media, comments emerged linking his death to what he said in his videos. But Paulo Gustavo himself had already explained that the goal of those jokes was never to offend any faith. The intention, according to him, was precisely to point out the contradiction between religious discourse and the lack of empathy of those who most preach it. Humor as a tool of critique, even if not everyone accepts this approach. Don't forget to subscribe so you can watch more videos like this.